we're learning more about the women who decide to end their pregnancies. A New York Times article titled "Who's Getting Abortions in America" examined data from the Centers for Disease Control and the Guttmacher Institute. They reported that 60% of women who seek an abortion have other children, and 42% of women who were getting an abortion have had one or more previous abortions. But another study by the Charlotte Lozier Institute looked at a broader picture of abortion in the United States. Lauretta Brown, reporter for the National Catholic Register, joins us now to explain the differences in these studies. Lauretta, thank you so much for that piece and for your in-depth look at these two studies. Tell us a little bit more about what you thought those differences were in painting that picture about abortion in America.
Yeah, there were a couple of things. The 2019 CDC statistic that 60% of women who were getting abortions, had another child. The New York Times kind of looked at that and said, okay, women with children get abortions, but the Charlotte Lozier Institute looked at Medicaid-enrolled women over a longer span of time, 15 years, and it was all the pregnancy outcomes, so births, abortions, miscarriages. And what they found is that, in that span of time, 5.7% of the women who had children were getting abortions, of the births in that time period, the 15-year span of that study, 92.8% of those births were women who had no abortions. So actually what they found was that abortion was quite rare for low-income women who already had children, that this was not a common occurrence.
So not the exact same outcome, and one that had different data. I think that you mentioned that this is something that the New York Times touched upon, but said that they didn't have the complete data set. Charlotte Lozier Institute does have a complete data set. So then, talking about the data, what is the difference then with the method of data collection?
Yeah, so for the question of, do women who already have children get abortions? The New York Times was looking at CDC data from 2019, 1 year, and of the women getting abortions, right? And so the Charlotte Lozier Institute looked at Medicaid-enrolled women from 1999 to 2014, a span of 15 years, and they were looking at all the pregnancy outcomes. So really, you get that broader context there of, the women who were getting abortions compared to the women who, were having children and were having miscarriages, and just that whole cycle of, who was giving birth and having abortions, and what patterns emerged. And one thing they found as well was that if a woman had an abortion, she was more likely in the subsequent pregnancy to have another abortion. So pro-life advocates I talked about how important it was for the pro-life movement to look at abortion healing to help women work through that trauma so that, they don't go on to choose a subsequent abortion.
Right, that's exactly right, and it's something that isn't talked about. You mentioned miscarriages, and that's also something that isn't talked about. All of these different kinds of loss, not equating them obviously, but they are losses that we carry. Well, let's talk about something a little bit different, which is just the issue of race. It's something that the New York Times article said they mentioned that they didn't want to look into because they thought their data was incomplete. What can you tell us about that?
Yeah, so the CDC doesn't collect, information about race from 20 of the states that they get abortion info from. So that's why they think it's kind of incomplete. But really, though, if you look at the trend of the CDC data we do have and information from the states, it's quite alarming and noteworthy. What you see is that 3 times the amount of black women get abortions compared to white women. And also, one very alarming statistic is that in New York City for years, more black babies were aborted than born alive. And the number of black babies aborted in New York City is still quite high. And so it's just something where you really see a disproportionate impact on the black community that abortion has.
It's very hard not to call that targeting. Is there anything else that you think is worth mentioning about this coverage or any other pieces that you're working on right now?
Well, I think just a lot of the pro-life advocates I talk to are really trying to reach these women and are talking about trauma and lack of resources being some of the main reasons where these women go back to abortion. So I think the pro-life movement is aware that they want to reach out to these low-income women, to these women who have circumstances where they keep choosing abortion, and fix the problem, right? Not with an abortion, but with some real healing. So I think that was very moving to see, and something that I think the pro-life movement will continue to work on.
And a discussion I know we'll continue to have, especially with the upcoming Supreme Court decision, resources and healing. Thank you so much, Lauretta.
Thank you, Montse.
Christina Bennett, a very active voice in the pro-life movement, particularly within Black communities, joins us from Middletown, Connecticut. Christina, it's great to have you here. You've worked in pregnancy resource centers and understand the community unfortunately seeking abortions. Lauretta Brown of the National Catholic Register just reported that those seeking and targeted for abortions are overwhelmingly Black and brown. Is that in line with what you've witnessed?
Unfortunately, yes. And that is because the abortion industry, specifically Planned Parenthood, since its inception has targeted the Black community, not to mention the fact that in states like Connecticut, Medicaid pays for about 75% of all abortions through taxpayer dollars. So between the government paying for abortions for low-income women and Planned Parenthood targeting them, you do see a large amount of women of color, unfortunately, choosing abortion.
And the targeting seems to be something that everyone is admitting to. I know the New York Times had its own expose on the eugenics backgrounds of the abortion movement, but you mentioned something really important, this idea of low income. Is the argument that abortion helps lift women out of poverty a viable one at all?
Oh, absolutely not. I mean, we've had abortion for close to 50 years, and we're still suffering as a community, in the Black community. We're still suffering with high rates of single-parent families. Unfortunately, we're still dealing with very high rates of maternal mortality and infant mortality. And we've had abortions for 50 years, and this has not helped us. This has not helped us succeed or prosper or grow in the ways in which we should. And so it's really just a lie from the abortion industry and its marketing on their behalf to make it seem like abortion is a solution to poverty when it is so far from that.
And Christina, you stood outside of the Supreme Court and you're hoping that the Dobbs case out of Mississippi will overturn Roe v. Wade and Casey. If that happens, then what about the pro-life work to come? If the women who get abortions are overwhelmingly poor and parenting alone, how can we offer them childcare, employment, affordable housing?
Well, the work, it is going to take decades and decades for us to do what we really need to do in order to help women and families. All the things that you mentioned are so important. Housing. When I worked at the pregnancy center, so many women would call and say, I would love to keep my baby, but I'm being kicked out. I have nowhere to go. And unfortunately, there was only a few options for them in my state of Connecticut. And it's like that all across the country. So we need affordable housing. We need paid parental leave so that moms can have a good amount of time to stay home with their children and recover from their pregnancy. We need resources, and the pregnancy resource centers, and there's thousands of them, they do a really good job of helping support women, but they can't do it on their own. As a movement, we all have to come together and say, how can we help women? How can we make adoption more affordable? How can we make daycare more affordable? How can we make it so that women and their families can truly thrive?
Well, that's 100% what needs to happen, and something that Jeannie Mancini was talking about when she was on the show earlier. Christina, she also talked about an incident at the March for Life. She denounced a white supremacist group earlier called Patriot Front that crashed the March for Life, saying, "We condemn any organization that seeks to exclude a person or a group of people based on the color of their skin or any other characteristic. Such exclusion runs counter to our mission, which recognizes that all human lives are equal from the moment of conception. Equality begins in the womb." What are your thoughts on this event and the statement?
I think that was a really wise statement. I'm glad that she made that statement. It's important for us to denounce white supremacy and racism. And I don't even know why they came to the march. Honestly, I think it was just to create a distraction and to try to create trouble, because I've been in the pro-life movement for 17 years now, and I have never met a white supremacist in this movement. I've never encountered any white supremacist groups. And so it's really sad that they wasted their time to try to come and bother a peaceful, nonviolent, loving, compassionate march, which we do, every year. And so I think it's really a distraction from what we're trying to do. And I'm glad she addressed it. But other than that, I wouldn't give them any more time, because they do not represent the pro-life movement at large.
And then there are other movements, though, that do say they're pro-life and pro-Black. I know that was a movement that was featured prominently this year. Do you think that those efforts to bring those messages together are worthwhile?
Well, I absolutely do. In fact, I'm on the board.
That's fantastic.
I'm on the board of Pro-Black, Pro-Life. It started by my friend and fellow pro-life leader, Sherilyn. and she is a former pregnancy center director. And I met her when she was doing pregnancy center work, and she's amazing. And we have some other really awesome board members. And basically, we're just trying to get the pro-life movement into the Black community, as well as letting the Black community know that we care for unborn children. We care for Black babies, all babies, from the womb to the tomb, from the cradle to the grave, not only when they're in their mother's womb, but all throughout their life. And we want to support them and give them whatever resources that they need to survive and to make it.
With that in mind, when you think about the message of the march, or even what you see in pregnancy resource centers, are there changes you would suggest that would help reach at-risk women or Black women specifically?
I would just say that we need to continue to build bridges. And so I've been to a lot of banquets across the country, and sometimes there aren't very many Black people or people of color that are attending. And I know how difficult it can be to build bridges, but it's important for us to go into Black churches and to meet the pastors, to meet the ministers, because the churches really are the heartbeat of the Black community. It's important for us to invite them in to see the centers and to see the pro-life work that we do, or on college campuses. Perhaps if you have a white student group, go to the Black Student Union, go to the Jubilee Choir, go to whatever. Those are the groups that I was in when I was in college, but go to whatever Black groups there are on campus and invite them to see the work that you're doing. And maybe they're not ready for that, but have lunch with the leaders and talk to them. And oftentimes you'll see that in the Black community and in the pro-life community, there's certain things that would connect us, faith being one of those things. And so find connections over the shared things that we have, like faith, like love for our community, and then go from there and help people to understand why it's important, why this is not just a white issue or a Republican issue or a conservative issue, but this is a human rights, civil rights issue, and we need everyone to be involved.
Absolutely a civil rights issue. Well, talking about civil rights and policy and public policy, there are some new candidates running for office, Black candidates. Do you think there's hope that they will take a stance on the abortion issue as well?
I'm a firm believer that there is always hope, but I definitely think that we need to do a couple of things. I think we need to pray. I know that prayer can move mountains and do miracles, so we need to pray for them. And then in addition to that, we need to educate them. I worked with an organization in Michigan, and I ended up making a movie called Still on This Journey. And it basically talked about abortion in the Black community. And what I loved is that, Michigan Right to Life, they took that film and then they went to Black politicians and leaders and they gave it to them. And they said, here's this film. It's, really well done. And we want you to watch it. And they watched it and they got really good feedback. And so that was one way that they were intentionally reaching the Black legislators in their community by pouring into them with a resource that they created to reach them. And so I think that we have hope, but we also need to be intentional in reaching out to Black leaders, politicians, and legislators.
Christian hope and intentional action. That's a great piece of advice to leave us with. Thank you so much, Christina.